Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon. RHOC Shannon Beador recalls surreal jail experience. RHOC star Shannon Beador is recalling her surreal jail experience. The mother of three was locked up after she had her DUI hit and run. Now, she is reflecting on what that night was like and how it felt to be behind bars while in the most intense pain. Keep reading for all of the details on Shannon's experience. RHOC Shannon Beador recalls surreal jail experience. Shannon Beador's co-stars have long talked about her drinking and how she needed to slow down. Yet she kept going and living her life until one night, she made a horrible mistake. That RHOC star drank and drove from her ex-boyfriend, John Jensen's house. They had a fight which led her to leave. Though she knew she should not drive because she had alcohol, she did and ended up having a hit and run. It eventually led to her getting arrested for a DUI as Shannon had left the scene with her dog, Archie, by her side. Since that happened, she has had to serve community service, go to an alcohol treatment program, and relive the nightmare on season 18 of RHOC. Now she is opening up about having to spend time in jail after that fateful night that has changed her life forever. According to People, Shannon is claustrophobic, so being in a cell added to the nightmare. She added that she tried to pretend she was in a bedroom in an attempt to get over her claustrophobia. As much as it distressed her, Shannon had to serve her fine of 5 hours in jail. It was not a pretty sight for Shannon Beador, who was bloodied up and barefoot. Changing her ways. Though being behind bars was a horrific experience, it should have been enough for Shannon Beador to change her ways. However, as seen in clips for RHOC season 18, she still has a few cocktails here and there. Yet Shannon notes that she drinks with a different mindset now, and is not an escape tactic. Her friendship with Tamra Judge also suffered as they were doing the Tres Amigas tour with Vicky Gunvalson. Some of the jokes involved drinking, and Tamra felt it was too soon after Shannon's arrest to go down that road. Plus, her schedule did not align with their tour. So she backed out, which has caused major dissension between the women and has been a friendship ender. Tamra also has talked about seeing Shannon sneak alcohol shortly after her arrest, which she had a hard time with. Shannon maintains that she has changed, that this has been life-changing, but it really shook her three girls. Shannon Beador never imagined her life would take such a sharp and sudden turn. The glamorous world of the Real Housewives of Orange County was supposed to be about luxury, drama, and the high life, never jail cells and mugshots. But as Shannon found herself sitting in the back of a police cruiser one fateful night, the reality of her situation began to sink in, and she knew this was a moment that would forever change her. It all began with a night that started like any other in Orange County. A glamorous charity event, champagne flowing freely, and conversations peppered with drama. Shannon, known for her penchant for a good time and her outspoken nature, was in high spirits, mingling with familiar faces and letting the evening's energy sweep her away. But as the night wore on, her mood shifted. The pressures of her ongoing battles, both on and off the screen, began to weigh heavily on her. With each sip of her drink, she felt the burden of her public persona pressing down harder. When she left the event, she didn't realize just how much those pressures had affected her. Her head was spinning, not just from the alcohol, but from the whirlwind of emotions she'd been wrestling with for months. She just needed to get home, to the safety of her own bed, where she could curl up and escape the relentless scrutiny, if only for a few hours. But fate had other plans. As she drove, the streets seemed to blur, the lines between reality and a waking nightmare becoming indistinguishable. The familiar route back to her home felt strange, and before she knew it, blue and red lights were flashing in her rearview mirror. Her heart raced, her hands trembled on the steering wheel, and a cold wave of fear washed over her. She knew what this meant, but a part of her still hoped this was just a bad dream. The officers were polite but firm. They asked her to step out of the car, their voices echoing in her ears as if they were speaking from a distance. The sobriety test was a formality. She could already see where this was heading. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she felt a rush of emotions. Shame, fear, disbelief. How had it come to this? The ride to the police station was a blur. Shannon tried to keep her composure, but the gravity of her situation was sinking in fast. The surreal nature of it all made her feel like she was watching someone else's life unfold, not her own. This couldn't be happening to her, not Shannon Beador, the glamorous, sharp-tongued reality star. She had always prided herself on being in control, but here she was completely powerless. The jail was not what she had expected. The cold, sterile environment was a stark contrast to the lavish lifestyle she was accustomed to. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the worn linoleum floors. As she was processed, her mind raced with thoughts of what would happen next, how this would affect her daughters, her reputation, her life. The mugshot, the fingerprints, the cold, metal bench she was told to sit on, all of it felt like scenes from a movie she never wanted to star in. The hours ticked by slowly. Every sound, every movement felt amplified in the quiet, sterile environment of the holding cell. Shannon found herself in the company of women who seemed as bewildered as she was, their own stories written in the lines of their faces. There was little conversation, just the occasional exchange of glances that spoke volumes. They were all trapped in the same surreal nightmare, waiting for the next step, whatever that might be. As she sat there, Shannon's mind began to drift. She thought about her life before the show, before the fame. She thought about her family, her friends, and the choices that had led her to this moment. She had always known that the life of a reality star came with its ups and downs, but nothing had prepared her for this. The guilt was overwhelming. She knew she had made a mistake, a grave one, and the repercussions would be far-reaching. After what felt like an eternity, the door to the holding cell opened, and an officer called her name. The moment she had been dreading was finally here. She was led out, her heart pounding, and given her belongings. The cool air outside hit her like a shock, a stark reminder of the freedom she had taken for granted just hours before. As she stepped out into the night, the reality of her situation began to settle in. This wasn't just a bad dream. This was her life now, and she would have to face the consequences. The paparazzi were waiting, their cameras flashing as she tried to shield her face. There was no escaping this. It was all too real. Back home, the silence was deafening. The events of the night replayed in her mind over and over. She couldn't sleep, couldn't find peace. The fear of what was to come, of how this would change her life, was suffocating. But there was also a strange sense of clarity. In those dark, quiet hours, Shannon realized that she had been given a wake-up call, one that she couldn't ignore. The next few days were a whirlwind of media frenzy and legal proceedings. Shannon knew she would have to face the music, that this would be a defining moment in her life. The support from her friends and family was comforting, but she also knew that this was something she would have to navigate on her own. Reflecting on the experience, Shannon would later describe it as surreal. It was a word that seemed to encapsulate the bizarre, out-of-body feeling she had experienced from the moment the police lights had flashed in her rearview mirror. But as surreal as it had been, it was also a harsh dose of reality, one that had forced her to confront her own vulnerabilities and the consequences of her actions. In the end, Shannon Beador emerged from the ordeal with a new perspective. The experience had shaken her to her core, but it had also made her stronger, more aware of the fragility of the life she had built. She knew that this chapter of her life would follow her, but she was determined not to let it define her. Instead, she would use it as a catalyst for change, a reminder that even in the most surreal of moments, there is always a chance to turn things around.